I am in a lot of rooms with business owners who are talking about their offering or their service or their business model. And I don't know if you guys experience this as well, but for a while there, every man and his dog was using the word pivot, which essentially meant that they were losing money and they were hoping that there was a different model or a different method that was going to be the thing that saved them, which, sure, yes, in some cases. But because I hear a lot of these conversations and I hear some truly terrible business models, I sometimes just want to yell a little bit about what you actually need to consider before you go and do these things. Because, it's something like changing a model, it isn't a magic trick, right? And if the fundamentals aren't there, all you're really doing is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You know what I mean? So before you redesign your offer, before you go ahead and pivot your niche or invent some new clever structure to do the exact same work, I want you to think about a few things that determine whether a business actually has the ability to survive long term, or better yet, survive outside of your imagination. Now, after that aggressive little cold open, my name is Amy Wallen. I'm the CEO of Linked VA, which is an offshoring agency, and you're listening to the Virtual CEO, where I'm going to tell you all of the dumb things that I see, I hear, and I sometimes say myself, so that we can all just do a little bit better together. Let's get into the 3 strategic questions you need to ask yourself before you redesign your business model. Number 1, what is your pricing model? Now, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to do any maths. This is just going to be very basic. Pricing wise, you are doing probably just one of 2 things in business, right? You are either selling something cheap or you are selling something expensive. That's it. That's really the 2 options that you've got. If you are selling something cheap, you need to be very good at marketing because you are going to need to make a lot of sales to make that model worth it. High volume, you need constant demand, constant attention. Cheap businesses, and I mean like selling something cheap businesses survive on the ability to attract people at scale. Think of like Amazon, right? But if you think of it as if you think it's as simple, as putting up an ad on Instagram, you have another thing coming. You need to know that you have the means to be a great marketer before you do this. Like dropshippers, I'm looking at you. Versus if you sell something expensive, then you need to be very good at delivery, right? Your product or your service needs to be actually worth the price tag. The experience needs to be good. The outcome needs to be clear because people will only happily pay a high price when they feel like the value is there. So those are your 2 options, right? Cheap and marketed well, or expensive and delivered exceptionally. And if you are good at neither marketing nor delivery, I would strongly advise that you either find a business partner who is, or, I don't know, reconsider starting a business. And while we're on the topic of terrible pricing strategies, if you're one of those people whose business model is an app, I swear to God, I meet one of you every single week. No, an app is not a strategy. My very first class during my MBA a couple years ago, the lecturer actually yelled this at the entire room. And at the time, I thought, this guy is so dramatic. And now that I'm more seasoned with all these fucking people and hear this bullshit all the time, I completely understand the rage. An app is a tool. It is a platform. It is a method. An app is not a strategy. Merely having an app means absolutely nothing. People are not going to buy your product or service just because it exists and they can access it on their phone. Especially, by the way, when there is almost certainly a bigger, better funded company also with an app that has a free version, right? And here's another inconvenient truth. People are not paying thousands of dollars for phone apps, which means that your model is app-based, right? Congratulations, you're automatically in the cheap, high volume, marketing heavy category, whether you like it or not. So you better be exceptional at marketing. And honestly, most of the app ideas I hear are not amazing. They are, like, generously speaking, one small step above garbage, right? So yeah, an app is not a strategy. Moving along to strategic consideration number 2. How much time does it actually take you to deliver the service, right? And this one is mostly for, your coaches, your consultants, like anyone whose entire business plan relies on more one-to-one conversations. And when I say one-to-one, I mean all of it, right? One-to-one sales conversations, one-to-one delivery calls, one-to-one support messages, one-to-one reviews. Because the moment that your service relies heavily on your time, there is going to be a very firm ceiling sitting right above your head. And a lot of people never bother to look up and notice it. So I had a conversation with a consultant who was extremely proud of the amount of value that he was giving to his clients. Great, happy for him. People paid him about, I think it was like $2,000 a month for consulting, and he was very proud to tell me that he was highly sought after. He said he even had a wait list to work with him. Now, don't worry, I obviously ruined his day shortly after this, because he then went on to explain how available he was to his clients. They had structured calls, right? They could jump on coaching calls whenever they wanted or whenever they needed. They could send him things to review and he would get back to them within 48 hours. He had all of these just communication features built into his contract. And this is why I always say people pleasers should not become consultants. By the way, they have no boundaries. They have none. They just have burnout. So I asked him a very simple question. On average, how much time per week are you spending on each client? Including the calls, including the messages, the reviews, everything. And he kind of sat there for a minute doing some mental calculations. And he eventually said, well, this week I spent about 20 hours with, company X. And that was actually a pretty light week for them. And I'm like, cool, 20 hours on one client. And I said, okay, so if they're paying you $2,000 a month and you're spending 20 hours a week on them, never mind the other clients, you can realistically have maybe 2 clients before you're working more than a full-time job. And on a wage that is, again, generously speaking, less than a waitress would make, is this worth it? Does that sound about right? And suddenly his wait list didn't sound so impressive. Honestly, no wonder he had a wait list. At this point, he was basically offering slightly more sophisticated slave labor, because he never sat down and actually calculated how much time he was giving away and what that meant for the viability of the business. And if you run a one-to-one service business, you have to factor in the human hours required to deliver it. One-to-one services are fine, right? There is nothing wrong with them, but they should be significantly more expensive than group programs or digital products or services that don't require constant human involvement, because time is the constraint. Even if you just think about what happens when you grow, let's say one person on your team can service 10 clients. Then as soon as you get client number 11, you need to hire another person, which means your revenue from 11 clients now needs to pay 2 salaries plus expenses or whatever else is happening in your business. And that's before we even talk about profit, right? Which, by the way, you do want. Please aim for profit. I don't know how many times I need to say this to people. 30% minimum if you're a smaller company. Anyway, that consultant eventually shut his business down when 2 of his clients left, right? He couldn't bring himself to put up boundaries. He couldn't bring himself to raise his prices because he felt greedy. So he just retired. Now, I'll say this again for the people at the back. People pleasers should not be consultants. It is not greedy to make money. He wasn't making money. He probably cost him money. Anyway, third strategic consideration, and take this one with a grain of salt, but do people actually want what you're selling? So I was in Pompeii a few years ago, and there was this guy there who was selling little glass vials of rocks from Pompeii while we were at Pompeii, surrounded by rocks from Pompeii. Now, look, I don't know if it was illegal to pick up these rocks. Maybe there was a rule about it. Maybe the Roman gods would, I don't know, curse you or whatever. But what I did know is that absolutely no one was buying this man's little jars of Pompeii dirt, right? Which is why I say take this with a grain of salt. Because there are some stupid fucking things out there that people will buy. I have bought some dumb things off of ads before, but they don't usually have long-term legs, right? And it also means that if you are actually quite shit at what you do, people won't want it either. which means that even the people that you manage to convince to buy from you will leave bad reviews, and they certainly won't come back, which just makes your life, 10 times harder. Now, the uncomfortable question is, how do you know that you're bad at what you do, right? Well, it's a pretty clear indicator if you are coaching something that you couldn't do yourself. So, for example, I used to work with a marketing agency that struggled to generate its own leads. I worked with a sales coach once who was just really slimy on sales calls and had zero follow-up process. I worked once with a resilient coach who sent me a 3,000 word meltdown email at 2 a.m. because I gave her slightly bad news, right? All of these things are not great signs. And no one wants a shitty product, right? It is so much easier to run a business when the product or service itself is desirable. And now I know that might sound painfully basic, but holy shit does it need to be said. If you want a simple way to sanity check your idea, just follow the basic principles of Ikigai. YouTube someone on that if you need to know. Is there something you're actually good at? Is there something you like doing? And most importantly, does the world actually need it? Right? I have been that girl, right? The one sitting around a little bit drunk with your friends, coming up with business ideas that will mean that we're on holiday for 6 months of the year, doing what we love, working with our friends, living the dream. We have all probably had a lot of those conversations. But none of those ideas ever came to fruition because once the hangover wore off and we saw the daylight again, I would run that idea through these very basic filters and realize, this is actually not a viable business. This should stay exactly where it belongs, which is as a fun little imagination activity that happens when we're 2 bottles deep and we're having a bit of a laugh and just loving spending time with our friends. And the thing is, a lot of business coaches and consultants won't tell you have a shit product or if you have a shit business model, because for a lot of people, hearing that means that they probably shouldn't start a business or they probably shouldn't keep pouring time and money into something that isn't working. And once that kind of harsh reality check happens, you will lose a lot of clients. But good news for me is I can't see your face, so I feel perfectly comfortable telling you this. Also, I actually want your business to do well. So if you ran your idea through these filters and it didn't pass, it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means you need to go back to the drawing board and design a version of the business that is actually going to work. And I should say that there is one situation where all 3 of these strategic filters become completely irrelevant, which is good news for some of you. And that is if you already have a lot of fucking money. Because if you've got some serious capital behind you, you can pour them directly into experts and ads and marketing teams and consultants and systems and whatever you need to just brute force the thing into existence. And at that point, strategy becomes a little less important because cash is king. Anyway, the whole point of this rant is not to kill your business dreams, right? It is just to get you thinking about them a little bit more strategically before you sink months or years of your life into something that was never going to work in the first place. Because when a business model works, it actually feels pretty obvious, right? People want what you're selling, the pricing makes sense, the delivery doesn't slowly kill you. And when each of these 3 things line up, the business starts to feel more like a machine instead of a constant uphill battle. And when they don't line up, what usually happens is people just work harder. They put more hours in, they put more stress in, they do more marketing. It's more desperation. They're just trying to force something to succeed that was fundamentally broken from the beginning. And that is a really painful way to learn business. So before you go building the website, before you go launching an offer or pivoting the model or announcing to the world that you've just started your exciting new venture, just take 15 minutes, run it through those 3 filters first, and you might save yourself a lot of time. And if after all that, you still really want to sell your little jars of Pompeii rocks, just don't do it at Pompeii, right? Anyway, thanks for listening to The Virtual CEO. My name is Amy Wallen, and I will see you, or you will hear me, I guess, next week.